The compact disc was introduced in 1982 by the Philips and Sony corporations. The CD boasted an astonishing 650 megabyte storage capacity, and each one also contained its very own monster. Hello everyone, my name is Delicacy, and this is Video Delicacies, where we seek to taste the greatest flavors that old games have to offer. I just played Monster Rancher, which was developed and published by Tecmo. It was released for the Sony PlayStation in 1997 and had a remake released for various platforms in 2019. I have to confess that when I was a child, I was an obnoxious sort of Pokemon fan. I was derisive toward anything that I perceived as being a knockoff of my dear franchise, especially Digimon and Monster Rancher. I did get really into Dragon Quest monsters though. I guess that one got grandfathered in on account of the series being older than I am. As an adult, I've come to appreciate Digimon, but I've never given Monster Rancher a shot until now. I went into this game enthusiastically, not just because I'm quite fond of the monster battling genre, but because this series in particular is beloved by multiple friends of mine. Anyway, I played this on my PS3 using a PS1 disc. The game opened with a mail courier requesting my signature. I chose to name the protagonist Terra, short for Monster Rancher. The letter was a certificate from the Fraternal International Monster Breeders Association. Having passed their exams, Terra could now begin ranching monsters. The association assigned them an assistant named Holly, who was also fresh out of school. I loved the little animated portraits during dialogue. Holly was by far the character I would be seeing the most, and a lot of care clearly went into making her expressive. She explained that the goal of the game was to battle my way through 6 official tournaments and 4 major ones. But first, I would need a monster. At the shrine, I could create one using any compact disc in my physical possession. I removed the Monster Rancher CD from the console and replaced it with my copy of Spyro the Dragon. The game read its data and prompted me to swap back. Then my monster appeared. They were a worm main worm sub worm. Such a lovely creature. Holly seemed unenthused, but I was committed. I named my worm Lofty and brought them back to the ranch. I was only allowed to raise one at a time, and I was told that monsters had a life expectancy of around 3 in-game years, so it would be just me, Holly, and Lofty for quite some time. At the start of every month, I needed to choose a type of feed. Potato cost 10G, fish cost 100, and meat cost 300. I only had 3000G at this point, so I went with fish. By the way, this localization made the questionable decision of he-himing every single monster. I will not be observing this convention myself, but it was kind of charming in a way. Months were divided into 4 weeks, and it was up to me to choose how to spend the time. Holly explained that work, battle, or rest would pass 1 week, and training would take 4. Since I wanted Lofty to become stronger, I started with training, though I was slightly concerned that doing so required 2000G. I was given the choice of 3 training locations focused on different stats. After each of the first 3 weeks, Lofty's life stat increased by 10, but then the 4th week was a miss, and so their attributes remained unchanged. Lofty also found an item called an apple cake while they were away. When they returned to the ranch, Holly asked if I wanted to punish them? Of course not. 75% is a passing grade. The second month also began with a visit from a mail courier, though this one was a dinosaur. It's adorable to me that Holly addresses this T-Rex as Sir. The delivery advertised that training fees were reduced that month. I suddenly felt very foolish for having blown most of my money the month before. Lofty was exhausted, so I let them rest a week. After that, I needed to start rebuilding my bankroll by putting them to work. There were 10 jobs available. Like the different types of training, they were associated with different stats. Okay, so I definitely wouldn't have started with training if I had known that I could raise stats while accruing money instead of spending it. After 2 jobs and another week of rest, May was over and it was on to June. Holly informed me of an official tournament coming up. These were held only 4 times a year. We spent the next 2 weeks working and then took a week off to rest right before the competition. When the date rolled around, Lofty and I were ready. The event's commentator wore a headset. Despite being the year 1000, the game's time period was playfully vague. The E-Rank official cup had 4 entrants. Every one of them would need to battle each of the others, and the one with the best record would be declared the victor. Lofty's first opponent was Barura, a blue version of Monster Rancher's Cyclopean mascot Suezo. This game's combat was extremely unique. I could press X to command Lofty to attack. They knew 3 different moves at this point, but I was unable to select which to use. That was instead decided by the distance between the combatants, as illustrated by the red bar. I would need to time the input when it was above the icon corresponding to my desired attack. I could hold R1 to instruct Lofty to close in, or L1 if I wanted them to back off. I would need to consider both monsters' attacks when deciding which direction to go. Lofty KO'd Barura and advanced to their battle against a monster named Bune. Bune looked like a Triceratops, but they were actually part of a monster type called Tiger. You may have noticed Lofty spinning around sometimes. Monsters had a loyalty value, which started at 0 for newborns and could be raised to a max of 100. The higher their loyalty, the more likely they were to obey commands. Lofty had only 17 here. While Lofty had won their first battle by KO, they were unable to deplete Bune's life bar before the 60-second timer ran out. Fortunately, they were still considered the winner because they had a greater percentage of life remaining. Lofty's last match of the day was versus the Dino Rogar. I love how every monster had 2D sprites in addition to their 3D models. The sprites were very cute. The green bar below Lofty's attacks showed their will. This gradually filled over time, and using attacks consumed it. Each technique's will cost was shown on its icon. However, it was not optimal to just fire off attacks as soon as possible. Lofty's damage and accuracy were scaled based on the bar's fullness. Lofty took down Rogar, giving them an undefeated record. They did a triumphant little dance, and then I got some prize money, 500G for finishing first, plus 100 for each win. When we returned to the farm, Holly asked if I wanted to praise them, which of course I did. So this is the sort of game that I imagine a lot of people play with some kind of guide. That's not how I prefer to do things, though. I did skim through the manual, which clarified a couple of matters, but looking anything up online would have diminished my enjoyment. I respect that the mechanics are a bit mysterious by design. For example, I don't fully understand how all of the stats work, but here's what I do know. Logging raised life. Life was 1-to-1 the monster's HP. Pulling a cart raised power, and guarding a manor raised defense. Those are self-explanatory. Hunting raised skill, which affected the accuracy of the monster's attacks. Foraging in the forest raised speed. Speed determined how fast a monster accumulated will, and therefore how many times they were able to attack per battle. That's all that the manual had to say, but speed had another function that was equally significant: evasion. I had an inkling of this early on when I noticed my attacks missing high-speed opponents, but some dialogue by Holly later confirmed it. Harvesting the field raised intelligence. According to the manual, intelligence influenced the likelihood of a monster learning new techniques. And again, that didn't tell the whole story, because intelligence was also responsible for the damage of magic attacks. I'm not certain, but I think intelligence covered magic defense as well. Aside from those 6 jobs, there were also 4 hybrid jobs that affected multiple attributes. Performing in the circus raised speed and intelligence but lowered power. Building with bricks raised power and life but lowered speed. Mining raised life and defense but lowered skill. And finally, delivering mail raised intelligence and skill but lowered defense. Winning the E-Rank official cup gave Lofty access to D-Rank battles. Aside from official cups, there were also side tournaments that were not required but which I could enter to win prize money. I had Lofty compete in a D-Rank competition called the Salem Cup, but they finished in 3rd, paying out a pitiful 100G. It was clear that Lofty had some growing to do before they'd be ready for this tier of opposition. While doing some work, Lofty failed a job, meaning that their stats didn't go up that week. Holly suggested that I punish them, and in the interest of seeing what would happen, I acquiesced. This turned out to raise Lofty's loyalty. Loyalty went up naturally over time, but failing tasks and punishing was more efficient than succeeding. It's interesting that each outcome had a distinct but still desirable reward. I wonder whether the localizers considered replacing the red circle and blue cross with a more Western-friendly thumbs up and thumbs down to avoid potential confusion. After all, this is the console where 2 of the main buttons on the controller are a red circle and a blue cross. The D-Rank official cup had 6 entrants, and so Lofty had to endure 5 fights in a row this time. Fortunately, monsters were always restored to their full life between rounds. Most of the contenders in this competition resembled ones that I had seen before, but there was one entirely new monster type, a golem named Guron. Guron had a gargantuan 220 power, much higher than any of Lofty's attributes. Holly opined that we should concede, but I went ahead with the fight anyway. Sure enough, Lofty was KO'd very easily. Their final record for the day was 3-2, good enough for 2nd place. Lofty didn't rank up, but at least I got some walking around money. Since official cups were quarterly, it would be a while before I could try again. In the meantime, the background changed to display snow on the ground. The other season changes had been more subtle, so I hadn't noticed them. I generally wasn't that high on this game's music, but the winter track was nice. When December rolled around, I once again entered Lofty into the D rank cup. Since the winner of a round was whoever had the greater percentage of their life remaining at the end, anytime that I was ahead, I was incentivized to just sit and let my will accumulate. There was no pressure on me to keep attacking. If I was behind, though, I would need to keep desperately lashing out, even at low will, which was not ideal since those attacks would be likely to miss. This dynamic made combat feel slippery. It was advantageous to get a lead early and hold on to it rather than try to scrap my way back from behind. Tournaments contained the same opponents in the same order every time, and so round 4 was once again versus Guron. And as before, the massive golem easily crushed my delicate bug. But this time I discovered why Holly was so reluctant to allow the match. Lofty was injured, and was unable to participate in the rest of the event. This was scary. I had grown attached to Lofty and I didn't want to see anything bad happen to them. They spent the following month hospitalized, and their loyalty dropped from 64 all the way to 23. So why did this happen now and not before? Well, I was fighting from behind, and so I was frantically making attacks without preserving Lofty's will. They were KO'd with only 2 will this time, whereas in the first bout against Guron they had a safer 19 remaining. Training was again on sale when Lofty returned to the ranch. Instead of the normal 2000 G, it only cost half of that. The outcome was similar to their first training session, 3 successes and 1 failure. I took up Holly on her offer to punish Lofty, but afterwards she told me that I was being too hard on them. While on the farm, my parenting style was displayed in the bottom left. That last punishment had taken it from firm to strict. Then I remembered something, the apple cake that Lofty had found nearly a year earlier. This treat adjusted the style back to even. I was lucky to have that item this time, but I would need to strike a better balance going forward. I skipped March's official tournament to focus on becoming stronger. I did another training session in May, and this was the first time that all 4 weeks went well. Not only that, but Lofty learned a new attack. This was the primary benefit of training, and Lofty's failure to gain any from their previous sessions was why Holly had been offering to punish them. The training that I had done was focused on the skill stat, and so the attack that Lofty learned was one with a high hit percentage. There was an interesting tension there. I could only get a high accuracy move by raising the stat that would make it unnecessary for me to have such a move. It seems like one strategy would be to raise skill early in order to learn these sorts of attacks, and then pivot into raising power once skill is no longer as valuable. Lofty now knew 2 techniques with the same range. During battle, I could press up and down to cycle between them. My 3rd time challenging Guron, all of their blows missed. Once the timer got low, I had Lofty start making attacks, just to waste time and deny them opportunities to turn their luck around. Lofty won the cup, and got a huge increase to their fame. I never would have known this without the manual, but fame determined a monster's critical hit chance. Just as importantly, though, it also led to receiving fan mail, which was very cutely addressed to Lofty themselves. So it's probably apparent by now that my childhood assumptions about Monster Rancher could not have been more wrong. This is a vastly different video game from Pokémon. It's not even the same genre. While Pokémon is an RPG directly inspired by the Game Boy Saga games, Monster Rancher is a sim. It felt less like I was playing Final Fantasy and more like I was playing the Idolmaster. Like, the scheduling, the different training methods, rising through the ranks of competition, it was all there. Though what I suspect Monster Rancher is actually in conversation with is horse breeding games. I'm not very well acquainted with that particular subgenre, but I do know that there were a lot of them in the 90s. Replacing horse races with monster fights seems like a natural way to repackage that sort of gameplay for a younger audience. While I'm not equipped to fully trace it, I think that Monster Rancher's simulation lineage is super interesting. I enjoy a lot of monster battling games, but much of the challenge in them can typically be circumvented by grinding. I really like how monsters in this one having limited lifespans, like those of racehorses, elegantly removed that option. Our victory over the D-Rank Cup unlocked some new training locations. I sent Lofty to the speed-focused one and they came away with another new technique. This was their first attack in the longest range slot, and it was also their first magic one, though their power and intelligence were equal, so that didn't matter much. As my monster moved up in the world, the environments in which they battled became fancier, and the stands were more full as well. It was nice having that visual shift to mark my progress because otherwise things didn't change a whole lot. Something that I felt was really lacking in this game was any sense of who the other monsters were. Like, presumably every entrant in these tournaments was the pet of another monster breeder, but I had never met any other monster breeders. There was no sense of rivalry. There were 2 new monster types introduced here, a magic-focused pixie, and a defense-oriented gel. Chaos was in this game over a year before Sonic Adventure. If an enemy wasn't giving me enough space, I could press the square button to threaten them, forcing them to back off. This was a useful tool that I didn't employ enough until later. Lofty went 6-1, but as the number of entrants in a tournament went up, each individual round became less important to the outcome, so that one loss didn't keep them from finishing first. After that successful outing, we celebrated Lofty's 2nd birthday. Since they were entering what might be their final year of life, I decided to shift my focus towards saving up for the next monster. It seemed like money was the only thing that I could trust to carry over. However, gathering a certain amount of cash triggered an event. Holly offered to let me upgrade the ranch house and stable for a hefty fee. I agreed, and for the following month the farm became a construction site. After that, I had 2 shiny new buildings. I didn't know what these did for me, but since they were a permanent form of progress that I wouldn't lose upon switching to a new monster, I felt really good about them. It was nice to know that the time I had spent with Lofty had accomplished something. I wasn't going to try ascending any more ranks with Lofty, but since I was focused on accumulating wealth, it made sense to still enter side tournaments. The first B-rank opponents they faced were in the Summer Cup. In round 1, Lofty got mercilessly KO'd by a golem, but fortunately they escaped without injury. Also in this event, Lofty got to meet other worm monsters, a basic one like them, and also a much prettier one with wings. This was my favorite monster variant that I saw. Lofty lost all 3 rounds. I got no prize money, and their fame went down a little. Entering Lofty in more B-rank events seemed inadvisable. Instead, I elected to return to C rank and put them in the Heartfill Cup. Holly warned that, since I was going down a rank, Lofty's fame and loyalty would drop. I knew that this tournament was guaranteed to pay out, so that seemed like an acceptable trade-off. But after winning, I was shocked by just how much they fell. Fame went from 45 to 25, and loyalty from 100 to 74. It was time for Lofty to retire. I couldn't bear to make them unhappy by sailing through easy tournaments, but I also wasn't willing to risk their life in more challenging ones. To take a monster off my ranch, I needed to go to the lab. There they could freeze them in a crystal where they would be protected from the passage of time forever. Goodbye, Lofty the Worm. I love you. Monster Rancher is a humble little game, but it became the foundation for a pretty sizable franchise. Between '99 and '03, it had 3 numbered sequels and 6 spin-offs. That's a staggering number of games for such a short time. Things slowed down after that, with only a handful of new titles in the following years. But there have been some stirrings more recently, with both the remake project and a crossover with Ultraman, so the series might still have a future ahead of it. Aside from video games, there was also an anime adaptation around the time of Monster Rancher 2's release. The English dub of it actually aired on TV where I lived. This is, I believe, where I acquired the misconception that Monster Rancher is a Pokémon imitation. Compared to the game, the anime is much more of an adventure story. I replaced my Monster Rancher disc with that of RC Helicopter, and out popped my second monster, a Tiger Mane Tiger Sub Tiger. I named them Swirl. Holly graced Swirl with a better appraisal than she had given Lofty. I took a much more focused approach to raising them. I wanted Swirl's attacks to land and their enemies to miss, and so I prioritized skill and speed. It didn't matter if my hits were weak, all that I'd need to win was to have the most life at the end. Also, I found that I preferred the pace of combat once I had a monster whose will gauge filled at a decent rate. Because there was a hybrid job that raised skill and intelligence and one that raised speed and intelligence, Swirl, who was focused on skill and speed, was naturally accumulating a lot of intelligence as well. Once they started learning magic attacks, their damage output nearly doubled. Focusing on these 3 stats seemed to be where the game was leading me. During my time with Lofty, I always let everything play out naturally, but there was nothing stopping me from reloading saves. Now, I could have driven myself batty trying to get the perfect outcome for every single action if I had wanted, but instead I mostly just reloaded whenever I got a bad outcome from training or failed to take first in a tournament. Swirl cleared the ED and C rank official cups as Lofty had, and then advanced to the B rank one. Official tournaments and side tournaments of the same rank had overlapping rosters, so the monsters that Lofty had battled in the Summer Cup returned here. But one new foe who Swirl met was Riston the Hare. They could hit for massive damage without warning, and so I lost to them multiple times. But I eventually realized that the longest range of their attacks was the strongest, and so I had Swirl endure the more survivable up-close hits instead. We won the cup, and the week after was Swirl's 3rd birthday. Content with their performance, I decided to let them take a long vacation. So in my first 2 trips to the shrine, I had known which CD I wanted to use, and I accepted whatever monster it contained. After that though, I became more discerning. I spent an evening testing disc after disc to see what all of my options were. During these experiments, I encountered 2 new monster types, plants and nagas. Additionally, I discovered that most of the monster variants that I had seen were actually melanges of 2 types, a main one that determined the model and a subtype that provided the texture. This game touted that it contained over 200 monsters, and counting all of these individual permutations is how it arrived at that number. Since I was playing on PS3, the tactile experience was slightly modified for me. I didn't have the pleasure of opening and closing the tray each time, but just holding the discs in my hand and swapping them around felt like performing a magic ritual, which was exactly how the fiction framed it. It was a really neat gimmick. My plan had been to limit myself to other PS1 discs, but on a whim I decided to test my copy of Nappletail for the Dreamcast. Much to my amusement, this disc, which belonged to the wrong console and the wrong region, produced the strongest monster that I found all night, an Aloha main Dino Sub plant. Now that I knew my options, I began to hatch a plan. You see, some monsters born from discs were clearly more powerful than others, but none seemed like a particularly good candidate to beat the game. For that, I had to utilize another system, combining monsters. First, I would need a partner for Swirl. Using Disc 1 of Final Fantasy IX, I created Blank the Pixie. Blank was specialized in the same stats as Swirl, but to an even greater degree. Also, monsters had different pools of techniques that they could learn, and as a pixie, Blank was able to start picking up magic attacks right away. Blank was a killer. This was the first monster I had who won more matches by KO than by timer. Once I was done with Blank, I did not immediately combine them with Swirl. Instead, I started preparing another pair of monsters. First was Shard the Naga, born from the first disc of Dragon Quest VII. Shard started with an abysmal intelligence stat, and I think that's why they kept skipping work and wandering off. I never had this issue with anyone else. The final monster who I released from a CD was Alice the Aloha, whose origin I revealed previously. Alice was the easiest monster to raise so far. They were more studious than Shard, and they could take a punch unlike Blank. Monsters had differing animations when performing jobs. One of the joys of getting a new one was discovering which act they performed in the circus. In addition to the B-Rank Official Cup, I also had Blank, Shard, and Alice win the 4 seasonal B-Rank tournaments. These were worth 5,300 G apiece, and so I was able to fill my coffers a lot this way. Each also rewarded an item called a CD fragment, which I later discovered could be used during combination to raise a given stat by 10. One system that I haven't mentioned yet is expeditions. There was a character named Karn who would, on rare occasions, show up at the farm to invite my monster to spend a month playing a dungeon crawling minigame. The first time that this happened was with Blank, and I got nothing out of it because they weren't strong enough to break through the rocks and debris. Karn's second appearance was during Alice's shift. That time, I found a single item, a mint leaf that could be used to reduce a monster's stress. Both times I reset, and I turned down Karn's invitations after that. Now that I had 4 monsters past B rank, it was time for the next phase of my operation. You see, I wanted these 4 so that I could combine them into 2 stronger monsters, and then, after raising those, combine them to form a final ultimate monster capable of finishing the game. The plan was to combine Swirl with Blank and Shard with Alice, but once I got to the actual combining menu I discovered a hitch. Monsters had differing compatibility with one another. Some were bad, some were so-so, and some were nice. The only nice combinations that I had were Swirl with Shard and Blank with Shard. After testing all of the different arrangements, I determined that the strongest monster I could create was an Allure main Pixie Sub Naga made from Blank and Shard. I opted to start there, and figure out what to do with Swirl and Alice later. I gave my new monster the name Birdie. Birdie had somewhat higher attributes than their predecessors, but the largest benefit of being a combination was that they started already knowing a bunch of moves. This made the early tournaments a breeze, and it also saved me a lot of time down the line because I didn't need to reset after any training session that didn't result in learning something. Much like their parent Blank, Birdie was a fearsome magic attacker. It hardly took any time at all before they were ready to challenge the A-Rank Official Cup. It had been many hours since I had seen new opponents, and this tournament had some very unique ones. In round 2, Birdie was up against a stylish monster named Argu, who looked like a floating mask with a cloak. They had an attack called God Anger, which was pretty sick, but I never got to see it because Birdie defeated them so quickly. Later, in the final round, they were pitted against this thing, Guardian. They looked like a relative of Nanasei's Rectangle from Custom Robo V2. As expected of a literal wall, Guardian's defense was high, but since they had low speed, Birdie was easily able to bombard them with their high damage, low accuracy attack, Fireball. Yes, this is known as Fire Space Ball, despite its animation looking like it should be called something like Sparkle Ray. It's wonderful. At the age of 2 years and 6 months, Birdie had already accomplished more than any monster before them. That's when I began to think to myself, maybe I don't need 2 more monsters to beat this video game. Now let's examine the boxes of Monster Rancher. I'll begin with the North American one, as that's the version that I played. It's not for me. It comes from an era of American children's marketing when everything needed to be irreverent and gross. But I don't want a jewel case that looks cracked, I want all of my jewel cases pristine. I'd also like to draw your attention to the tagline on the back because I find it fascinating. Whatever you do, don't sit too close to your CD rack. I guess the implication is that a monster will jump out and get you, but that's not the vibe at all. Nothing in the game itself characterizes them as dangerous to humans. Here's the original box from Japan, where the game was called Monster Farm. I like that title, it's much cuter, which is probably why it was changed. Speaking of cuteness, I do find the monsters in this game appealing, but that's mostly thanks to their animations. The designs themselves are not that distinctive, particularly for the more common monsters that we see here. They don't really shine in static images, especially when crowded together like this. The Switch version of the remake had a physical release in Japan. It was bundled with Monster Farm 2, which I haven't played, so I can only comment on the upper half. It uses the same render, but the background is drastically simplified, which is a major improvement in legibility. It's the best out of the 3, but this is very much a case where I prefer the book to its cover. Which is a shame, because there is good Monster Rancher art. Just look at this adorable piece on the back of the soundtrack. The S-Rank official cup was Monster Rancher's most grueling challenge. First up was a hare named Arngra, who, like Birdie, was a total glass cannon. This match was essentially a 50-50, and the odds didn't improve much from there. This whole tournament felt like a series of coin flips. Most of the opponents had attacks that were capable of crushing me out of nowhere. It took 8 total tries, but eventually all of my coins came up heads. When Birdie returned to the ranch, it was their 3rd birthday. I was told at the outset that monsters had a limited life expectancy, but I was pointedly cautious to never let them reach the end of it. Even if I could just reload a save, I really didn't want to see a monster die. But now I was in uncharted waters with Birdie. I didn't have a good sense of how much further I was able to push them. Could they hang on long enough to win 4 more times? The first of the major tournaments was the Disc Cup held in November. Each major tournament had only 3 opponents, and the first 2 were returning ones from the S-Rank Official Cup, so I knew that I could beat those. But the ace was always someone new, and they were terrifying. The Disc Cup's final boss was a big monkey named Arbar with some funny attacks involving a banana. Birdie defeated Arbar on my 4th attempt, but I think I just got lucky. They used a move called Magic Banana, which seemingly did nothing, and then simply loafed around for over 20 seconds while the timer ticked down. I'm not sure what happened there, but I'll take it. Next was the All-Star Cup in February. I fondly remember when Super Smash Bros. Ultimate was unveiled during E3 2018. Who could forget that famous slogan, "All the ones are here"? This cup's champion was named Gureb. From their sprite, I assumed that they were a tortoise, but what they truly were was way cooler, some kind of alien robots. Gureb's skill and speed were even higher than Birdie's, but at least their offensive stats were low. Even so, Final Sword, their longest range attack, was problematic. The trick here was to keep close. On my 6th try, I just kept R1 held the whole time to continually approach, while repeatedly jabbing with Flame, Birdie's melee attack. That was all it took to defeat Gureb. The 3rd major tournament was May's Masters Cup. The last opponent here was Gobarn, some kind of horror movie creature with a metal claw. All of their stats were basically even, which I didn't find that intimidating, but once in the ring, there was a clear problem. Gabarn had extremely potent attacks at all ranges. Regardless of where I positioned Birdie, they were in danger of being one-shot. So between each of these tournaments, I'd been balancing circus work to raise Birdie's speed and intelligence, with training to raise their skill. But missing wasn't the issue here. After losing to Gabarn 4 times, I reloaded a save from right after the previous tournaments. This time, I skipped the training and went circus all the way in order to maximize on speed. Sure enough, on my next attempt, Birdie evaded every attack and I was able to win. This was such a rewarding moment. I identified a problem and I fixed it through monster ranching. By the way, I was raking in money at this point. Each of these tournaments brought in a massive 10k windfall. After the Masters, Holly offered to once again rebuild the ranch house and stable, and this time she kindly explained what these upgrades did. The house determined how many items I could hold, and the stable had something to do with monsters' growth. I didn't get to enjoy them for long, but the new buildings did make my farm look more legitimate. Birdie celebrated their 4th birthday, and Holly voiced the opinion that I should let them retire. This wasn't the first time she had floated the idea. Just one more tournament, Holly, I know Birdie can do it. August arrived, and with it the Monsters Cup, my ultimate trial. Awaiting at the end was the silver dragon Redondo. I knew that Birdie had already won the moment I saw Redondo's stats. Low skill and speed? No problem. Birdie slayed their last foe without a scratch. And here's Birdie's final report card. It turns out that this monster ranching stuff is pretty easy. Literally only 3 of the stats matter. Being declared a master breeder took Tara 20 years and 19 weeks. In our world, completing Monster Rancher took me 30 hours and 9 minutes. Playtimes for this one probably vary wildly from person to person. I know that I only scratched the surface. Like, I basically didn't engage with expeditions at all. Also, there were tournaments called Trial Cups to unlock new monster types, but I only competed in one a single time and I got trounced. It's easy to see how someone could spend 100 hours or more on a game like this. For me, however, I'm glad that it ended when it did. I could feel myself approaching the point where I wouldn't be having fun anymore. Though it would have been neat to get to raise whatever kind of monster Gureb is. So, I truly love video games. One of the best parts of making this video series has been getting to experience all of these different varieties that I might have never been motivated to try otherwise. I've never played anything quite like Monster Rancher. It's beautiful that even games like this one from 3 decades ago still have so much to show me. I love getting to fill in the gaps and understand these games for what they truly are, instead of what I assume them to be. I'm left wondering what other games are not what I think they are. But for now, the time has come to freeze Monster Rancher in a crystal and rank it against the 18 other games that I've played for this video series. As a kind of simple, lightweight PS1 game, I prefer it over RC Helicopter. I think Monster Rancher plainly had a lot more depth to it. The more pertinent comparison is to Shepherd's Crossing, the other farming game. There's a lot that I could contrast between the two, but the biggest difference for me is that the world of Monster Rancher was a lonely, isolated place. Shepherd's Crossing easily could have felt the same way, but instead its developers put a lot of work into filling the setting with friendly characters who would frequently stop by to chat. Anyway, I've enjoyed every game that I've played for this series, so it is with no disrespect whatsoever that I deem Monster Rancher my new number 18. Monster Rancher is, in a way, a game about making the most of the limited time we have with our animals. And speaking as someone who lost a pet recently, that's a subject that I have a lot of emotions about. Nevertheless, I had a lot of fun making this video, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you did, do me a favor and click the like button or leave a comment to let me know. I also have a Patreon which you can join if you'd like to see your name appear here in future episodes. To those of you already listed, thank you so much for your continued patience and support. I truly appreciate it. I haven't fully decided what I'll be playing for the next installment of Video Delicacies. Given that the last 3 games have all been around 30 hours long, it'll hopefully be something a bit shorter. For now, I leave you with one of my all-time favorite video game trailers. It's only loosely connected to the content of today's video, but this may be the most appropriate opportunity I get to share it with you. Please enjoy.